Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Hi, Taina. So happy to be here.
Yes, I'm grateful that you're giving us this time because I feel like your topic is really important. So I'm hoping that you will introduce yourself and let us know where you're coming from, the types of clients that you see, but also the types of therapists that you work with because you are an EMDR approved consultant.
Yes, absolutely. So, hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Julie Bindeman. I am a reproductive psychologist, and geographically, I am situated in a suburb of Washington, D.C., which is where I both live and I work. I am the co director of a practice called Integrative Therapy of Greater Washington, which has been in business now for 17 years, which I find kind of mind blowing. And we are a practice that many of us are generalists, many of us see people all across the lifespan for lots of different reasons. And there are a group of us, of which I've all trained, and we specialize in reproductive health or reproductive psychology, as I like to refer to it. And I feel like many of us, I was drawn to this work, as I like to say, honestly, by my own reproductive journey. It gave me kind of the eyes wide open view of like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. And I find it so ironic because in graduate school, I thought I was going to be a child psychologist. It's what I studied. It's what I did in grad school. It's what I did after grad school. I worked with kids and adolescents. I worked, studied about babies in grad school. So when it came time for me to think about that, I was like, oh, I know everything. Because I think many of us that work in the child field are like,
Mhm.
oh, we know everything. We know the theories and we know attachment and we know what we're supposed to do. And then having small humans 24/7 really shift that perspective a lot. So once that actual tiny human came into our lives, I was like, oh my gosh, I know nothing. God, I knew everything. I know nothing though. Um, and just, remember standing on the doorstep after being ushered away from the hospital after 2 days, which felt way too short to me. And they're like, go on home. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And then they left us with this baby. And I was like, we're going to kill it. Like, this baby's going to die in the next 24 hours. Very convinced of that. And my husband was like, we're not going to kill it. We can do this. And I'm like, huh, no, we are not equipped. We have no idea what we're doing. And I feel badly for this child. Um, I'm happy to say he's now a thriving 16-year-old. So we figured it out. But that is what got me started. And I think, like a lot of people who come to this field, I dove into perinatal work. I dove into postpartum. I mean, I was looking at myself being like, oh my gosh, this was so hard for me. And in theory, I knew what I was doing. What is it like for the average person who really doesn't know what they're doing? They don't even have, maybe that's even better. Like, maybe I would have been served better if I didn't know what I thought I knew. And so just went in whole hog, like did uh I did the PSI course. It was back when it was in person, many moons ago. um and I was actually, I found myself disappointed with it. I had signed up for this 2-day course. I went with a bunch of friends. We all came out of it feeling very similarly, which is, but they didn't tell us anything we didn't already know.
Hmm.
So that was really disappointing. And yet, this is supposed to be the gold standard. And perhaps things have changed since I did it. As I said, I did it a really, really long time ago. And also, the content they gave is good content. It was just really basic. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Not that it's bad content, but just it was really, really basic. Um, not having done a whole lot of work in that part, I was like, wow, but I know most of this. And so that was really surprising to me. Um, and what I started to see, which I'm sort of not answering the question you asked me. So, like, who I see now is anyone along the reproductive spectrum, typically I tend to see people who have had complex kinds of losses, who struggle with infertility, perhaps are pregnant after a loss. These kinds of patients are the ones that really are seeking me out. People seek out our practice for postpartum, for birth trauma, for all of the things. And as you correctly mentioned, I have been trained in EMDR since 2017. I've been certified and decided to become a consultant and am an improved consultant. So I work with people in that realm who work with reproductive psychology. And again, those more complex kind of things, the infertility, the pregnancy loss, the terminating for medical reasons, the uncertainty, the ambivalence about having a child, all these kinds of things. That's my sweet spot. What do we do with our gametes that we've preserved? What do all of these things are things I really enjoy doing. But I feel like I kind of have to share part of my origin story in order to get to what I'm really excited about talking about today. And I think a lot of it just kind of comes to the idea of we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of times the trainings, the certifications we do, I think they give us a false sense of what we know. And this idea of, oh, well, if you have this, I think there's an assumptive sense too that, oh, if we have this certification, then you must know all these things.
Mm.
And what I find is that, we know that 1 in 8 people are going to struggle with a perinatal mood or anxiety issue. Okay, we know those things. But do we also know that 1 in 4 people are going to experience a pregnancy loss? And,
Right.
what does that then look like if they're feeling sad? And how long are they allowed to feel sad before we start to potentially, or would we even think about it as postpartum, right? Like, is that a conceptualization people might even bring to it? Because, well, it's a loss. You're not taking care of a baby. You're not doing any of those additional burdens that come with being postpartum. Your body hasn't changed, or has it?
Mm.
So I think, again, there's these nuances, these things that we need to recognize, we need to know, because we do a disservice, we do harm
Mm.
to our patients, to our referral sources, when we think we know more than what we actually know. Um, and while I think it is wonderful to start having these kinds of certifications in this area, I think because there's only one, it gives the idea that it encompasses everything in this area, and it does not. So that might be an unpopular opinion. I'm gonna hold pretty strong to it though. Um, for example, when we're learning about postpartum, we don't talk about conception. Obviously, we assume it happened because someone's postpartum, but do we know how long conception took? Do we know what that was like? Do we know if these are their gametes or someone else's? Do we know, if this was a couple at the beginning, are they still a couple during postpartum? I know lots of people that started out, whether same sex or heterosexual couples, started out as a couple, did not end up as a couple when we're talking
Mm.
postpartum. Um, all of these nuances, right? How long did it take for a person to get pregnant? What was that like? What did they have to go through? How many rounds did they have to go through? What are their worries now because of all they went through about this developing pregnancy or about this baby that they now have to take care of? What are the feelings they might have towards this child, right? Because what they're being told is, oh, you must be so relieved and so grateful. Oh, what a miracle, what a blessing. And all those things are true. And they're still tired.
Mm.
And it's still a thankless job to be a parent of a newborn. And, they're still trying to figure out which way is up. So when I think about my clients going through infertility, one of the things we talk about is like, we need to think about this as a triathlon,
Mm.
and that getting pregnant, that's the first part. And maybe that will take a long time, maybe it won't. And then the second part is being pregnant. And maybe that's a one shot deal, or maybe you have to get to that point a couple of times and restart that leg of the race. And then having a baby, that's the third round. And what is that like? So coming up with that even kind of framework. And if these are things you don't know, like, it's not going to make sense to you why that's important, or how does infertility then connect to postpartum? Because I think a lot of people want to think it doesn't. Hey, once you get pregnant, you're fine.
Well, and that makes me think, and I know that I went to graduate school a long time ago, but no one ever mentioned maternal mental health. Nobody mentioned anything postpartum. Nobody ever mentioned fertility. So, kind of back to what you were saying about exams, I think about that in terms of learning. I would love to consider myself a lifelong learner, because, I mean, in addition to the fact that we'll never know everything, there are always new things coming up. So one of the resources that I give to all of my consultees is you have a year-long fertility course. And I rave about it, and you don't pay me to do this, but I loved it and I learned about it despite all the stuff I knew before that. Um, and I would love for you to talk a bit about that and how you formulated that course and why it's so helpful for clinicians, whether this is their area of specialization or this is just something that is adjacent to their areas.
Yeah. So I'm going to get to that, I think, by taking a step back for a moment. And hopefully I'm going to cover everything because you just asked a whole lot. So, okay, we're going to do the best we can. I think, I mentioned that a lot of people come to this work because they've had their own experience somehow being touched by it in some kind of way. And so what I often see is I'll talk to people that might be interested in my course, or they might be like, oh, I don't think I need it. And they will talk about how they've gone through their own journey. And maybe that journey has included pregnancy loss. Maybe it's also included infertility. And so because of that lived experience, which is a useful perspective, there's this false sense of confidence that they know all the things. Yeah, I've been through a journey myself too. Also, I know that I have the ethical obligation and responsibility that if I am training in an area, I really need to do didactic training, that the been there, done that, valuable, but it is not a substitute for didactic training. And as soon as I got into didactic training, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of things here I don't know because they didn't match my experience. And it was like, oh, okay, that's really important because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think sometimes when we have our own experience, we get so lost in that perspective that it's really hard to recognize there are others out there. So I came to this work, and I was trying to get as much education as I could. And I did every webinar I could. And I mean, this is back in 2009, 2010, and there's not a whole lot out there. And I am searching the internet for everything I can, taking everything that I can. And I come across, happened to be local to me, an in-person class. It was 10 months long, taught by a mental health clinician here. And I decided to sign up for that class, did the whole year of it. I learned a lot and really took off. I joined a professional organization called the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. I became active in it. And through there too, I kept on learning what it was I didn't know. And not just what I didn't know, because I continue to learn, because things change. It's a pretty young field and things are constantly changing as the research is pointing us to different ideas and different ways of thinking about things and different ways of working with people. We need to adapt to those changes. We need to be flexible and curious in our own thinking, that it's okay. Like I'm so able to acknowledge that I don't know what I don't know, which is why I constantly seek out consultation and trainings and all the things. So having that course, and that was good, but the way it was taught, I learned differently than how it was taught. And so the expectation was we would read a chapter in a book and then we would talk about it and then there would be case examples. And that was fine. And a lot of people learned that way and that was good, but it didn't bring it alive to me. And I found it a little dry. And so after getting enough experience and doing enough of my own writings and my own presenting, I decided I'm going to make my own. Like, there's so many people out there that don't know what they don't know. And there's lots of room for 2 courses, 3 courses, 4 courses, lots of them. I want people to have information. I want them to get it from people who know what they're talking about. And it doesn't have to be me. And so I offer a course. I now offer 2 options for it. It's a year-long course. I'm not trying to just be an ad for that. But really, it takes a very holistic way of looking at reproductive psychology. And it's looking from the onset that it's not an equal playing field for everyone. And so for people that look like me, it might be much easier to attain access to care. But for people who don't look like me, there are obstacles before you even walk into a fertility center. And so thinking about it from that kind of cultural humility perspective and being able to weave in aspects of, so here's what it's like for some people. And, as a cis het person, here's what it might be like. But if you're trans, it might be different for you. If you're part of a same-sex couple, it's going to be different for you. And how do we navigate that too? Again, what are the obstacles before anyone might step into a clinic? So I think I answered your questions. Now I'm like, wait, what else were they?
Yeah, no, I love that response, and I love how that brings up something that I was going to mention as well, which is I think one thing that is very specific to your course, and I do lots of professional development, is that you don't have a class that's called Let's Talk About Everything That Is Not the Standard. You weave that throughout with real careful consideration. I can't imagine how much time you spend and update it, because I know you update the course every year as well. But it is just so, even just aspects of religion that might be affecting people's journeys, aspects of culture. I still on a weekly basis find new things. I think one thing that, if people have not taken a course with you or consulted with you, is that when I ask you a question, you usually follow up with research articles, and you're like, and here's the research base. So I love that as well.
It's why Mara and I get along so well.
Yes. Yeah, and I love referring people to you as an approved consultant who really want that deep dive into, I may or may not specialize in this, but I'm working with a client who is having a really challenging fertility journey.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard for us too. So, there is a client I was recently doing a check-in with, and they're trying to figure out what their next steps are in their journey. And they started talking to me about adoption. And like at the onset, I said, I want to be really clear. I know the world of assisted reproductive technology really, 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 really well. I don't know the world of adoption as well. I know it cursorily, but I don't know it as well. So again, it's that sense of, our own ego and being able to say that and being able to acknowledge, like, it's really okay to admit and to acknowledge what we don't know. And then it's like, okay, let me give you the resources of the people who do know this world, because you deserve to talk to them, versus me, who like might need to try to figure it out. But no, there are people who actually know it. So let's not make it hard.
Absolutely. So if you could give one or two pieces of advice to therapists who have, for example, a entry-level understanding of some of these contents, some of this topic, but want to learn more or need to know more, what would you be sharing with them?
Go slow. There is so much out there. And I think it's so easy to become really overwhelmed by how much is out there and the need to know it all. And A, you're never going to learn it all. And so and B, that's okay. Again, I know I don't know all the things. That's okay. And it's more that I know where to look if I need to find something, versus I have to have all the answers, or I know who to ask about it. So I really think going slow. I think I love eagerness, and I think it's also one of the reasons that people have asked me, they're like, is there any way for you to make your course more condensed? And I'm like, no, there's too much information. And the fact that we do it just 3 hours a month over the span of 10 months gives people a chance to really interact and digest the information that they're getting, not just from me, but from the readings that I suggest, so that they can really play around with it. And it's, I give readings because it's like, don't just listen to me. Like, here's also what people are saying. These are important, again, things to know. Again, I think lived experience is really valuable. I think that lived experience and didactic training can't be beat. Also, if you don't have lived experience, that's okay too. As long as you have empathy, you can do this work. So not all of us are going to experience all of the things that a person can experience around reproduction. And that's a good thing. I don't think any of us would want to experience all of those things. And the things we might not have lived experience with, we can empathize, or we can figure out, okay, what in my life might have made me feel like that? How might I have felt? What might this have been like? But not to be so based in, well, this is how I felt, so this is how you must feel. Because sometimes our clients have really different responses. So I'm thinking about a client that I'm working with, who had terminated for medical reasons. And as she's talking about it, she's like, I don't feel traumatized by it. Like, it was a terrible time, but I feel like it's kind of distant from me. And as I've gotten to know her more, I don't know that it's really distant from her. I think one of the things she learned in childhood, because she needed to learn it, was to detach in that way, to almost, like in a healthy, very functional way of trying to dissociate from difficult things. So I don't know what her felt experience is. I think we haven't caught up to that. I think we're sort of starting to catch up to that a little bit, and it's presenting as depression now. And so she's also someone who is really concrete. So anything imaginal, nope, out the window. So when we're going to be starting EMDR, and I've already said to her, we're not going to do it with standard protocol in that same kind of way where I might do eye movements and she's got to hold something in her mind, because I don't know that that's going to work best for her. So instead, we're going to be experimental about it. I'm going to have her draw out, words or images, pictures of part of this time. And then again, instead of doing eye movements, I'm going to have her scribble it and just try to black it out with a pencil. And she'll do the eye movements as she's scribbling back and forth. we're going to try that. We're going to see how that goes. I'll let you know. But again, trying to bring that creativity. And if I had just gone with my lived experience, then I'm sitting here being like, oh, what's wrong with her? What's going on? She's doing this wrong. Like, no, nope. Her brain works differently. So let me accept that her brain works differently. And I kept on saying to her, because she's like, well, I'm happy to try it that other way. I'm like, no, there's no need to. Why are you going to contort yourself? You're really being explicit with me about what works for you. Why would I ignore that? So, again, being able to take what I know and listen to what is being said to me so that I can offer the best treatment, or at least the best plan for treatment that I can. I'm really taking that into consideration.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And along those lines, are there things that you would have appreciated when you were just getting started, about how to get started in this field? I'm thinking about the people who might be earlier on in their journey of learning of this knowledge base. Um, so maybe sharing a little bit about what has been helpful for you.
So I wish that there was something in graduate school about it. I wish that I even knew that this was a thing. I feel like I came to this field so accidentally in so many different ways. In grad school on an externship, I worked with a high school student who was pregnant. One of my first jobs, I worked with another high school student who was pregnant. So like I was getting these bits and pieces of it and not really recognizing that like this is what I wanted to do. So that's one thing that I really wish I had. There's lots of people that are making to make that so. I know Rutgers now has a program that focuses on reproductive health and justice as well in social work, and that's incredible. A friend of mine is the director of it, and I'm just super excited because it's a new program. I know me and several colleagues were looking into what clinical psychology programs might offer this. I know other colleagues have looked at human sexuality more as a general idea across the lifespan, and they've looked at what counseling programs have offered, and what the findings tend to be across the different fields is it's not a whole lot. Even when I've talked to my colleagues in marriage and family therapy, they're like, yeah, no, we might get something on sexuality, but not necessarily reproduction. And then I think back to like what I learned in high school about reproduction. And, I think most of it was just to scare us to not have sex. But I came away with the idea of take your birth control, and if you want to have a baby, stop taking your birth control and you'll get pregnant. And I think a lot of people walk away with that as an idea, and that's really just not how reproduction works. So we're walking away with ideas that don't actually serve us and aren't useful. And now we're in this climate, and I think it's super important to talk about. We're in this climate where in at least 16 states, reproduction is really fraught. Research came out this week. I know we're recording this earlier than it's coming out, but this week research came out showing that there is an increase of distress in people who might get pregnant. And that's insane. So not even people who are pregnant, but the idea of they might get pregnant, and based upon where they live, they're terrified of it because they might not have choices if problems in the pregnancy arise, if their life is in danger, if they change their mind, all sorts of things that might happen. So I think the other piece too, in addition to going slow, I would say get angry. Because we don't know these things. We should know these things, and people are trying to take these things away from us. And for all of those reasons, I think it's really important for all mental health professionals to have at least a cursory understanding of reproductive psychology, even if this is not a group you plan to work with or specialize with. Well, you know what? That 65-year-old that you're working with who had an abortion, right as Roe became legal, is having a lot of feelings right now that Roe has been overturned in her state. And that might not be your focus of therapy, but as she hears these stories and as she hears all these bans that come out, she's having more and more distress over it. It's almost as if she's having some post-traumatic stress around it. And I think that's an important way of conceptualizing and thinking about this. Or thinking about the grandparent whose kids live in Louisiana and they can't create embryos there because of a law in Louisiana that restricts, that confers personhood to embryos. So it's not safe to store embryos in Louisiana. And what are they going to do if they have to create embryos? These are laws too that impact other aspects of our life. So they impact gender identity and gender affirming care. These are the strategies that get used around it are very similar. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to wax so political, but we're finding that our bodies are being made political, and what we can do with our bodies are being made political. And that is something that, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of your gender identity, should make you mad, because nobody should have to decide what happens to us except for us. These are the same kinds of arguments that people were making about getting the COVID vaccine, right? Like, well, it's my body. Why is somebody making me do it? That's a whole other conversation. But, this idea of what is autonomy, what do we get to choose for ourselves versus what are others choosing for us? And what is the consequences of that? So, I mentioned I have a kid, he's 16, we're starting to look at colleges. And one thing I've said to him is you might want to consider looking at schools where they have healthcare for people that you care about, that, people you care about can access the healthcare that they need. So that's a consideration that he's taking into play, that I might need to think about that. I hate that we have to think about that. That's terrible that we have to think about that.
But doesn't it make it easier to think about that with all of the knowledge base, right? So when I think about all of the things that I learned in your class, it gets easier for me to have these conversations with people because I have the content knowledge now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is, again, if you specialize in this field, you absolutely should know things about infertility, about pregnancy loss, about birth trauma, you know, uh, and just all of the impacts of all of these things. Because the worst thing, I've had way too many of the same experience where I have a client come to me, they had previously gone to somebody else who did not know about fertility, but they went to them because they clicked a box that they knew about fertility. Maybe they were, in network, and that was something that was important. I get all of those things. And the client would go to session after session and have to explain to the therapist what she was going through. And she came to see me. And at our first session, she starts talking about her fertility journey. And then she takes a pause to start to explain something. And I'm like, I know what that is. You're fine. And then I ask her a deeper question. I'm like, all right, so what's your AMH levels? Like, what are they looking like right now? What's the snapshot? What's FSH looking like right now? When was the last time that got tested? And being able to ask these kinds of questions, or saying, hey, what kind of protocol are you doing right now? Like, just give me a sense of that. And me understanding what their answers are makes the client feel held, makes them feel cared for. Because now they don't have to take care of me as they're trying to get help, so that I'm up to speed understanding how to maybe try to help them in this world I don't know. But no, I'm really well versed in the world. Or I can make suggestions like, given some of the family history you've explained to me and some of your own history, have you considered getting an immunology panel done? I'm really curious if maybe that's getting in the way. Now, that's not something that tends to be standard, but there's research in other countries that shows there's something to it. That research isn't being done here in the same depth and breadth that it's being done elsewhere. But being able to know that, that's really important. And again, giving our clients that sense of being held. It's always interesting too when I'm working with a client through infertility and they get pregnant and they're like, do I have to stop seeing you now? Do you not know about pregnancy and postpartum? I'm like, no, I gotcha. We're good. We can go through. And just that experience, of like, oh, thank you. I didn't want to find someone new now. And like, no, you're good.
That is, I'm laughing because it's true, right? And I've had that experience. So there is this empowerment piece where we're helping the client to be advocates for themselves in wherever they are in the process.
Yes.
And that brings me to this question, because I know that a lot of the topics in our clinical work can be just really challenging. It's not always a dinner table conversation. But we do it for a reason. So my question is, what do you love about this work?
I love a couple that I'm working with who experienced a pregnancy loss about a year ago. They're pregnant again with a subsequent pregnancy after loss. We were doing some couples EMDR. And I love, right as we were ending, and this was about a week or so before their daughter's birthday, and they started crying. And I'm like, all right, so, what are you noticing? Tell me what's going on for you. And they said, and it gives me chills to even think about it again. They said, I just never thought I would be here right now. I never thought that I could think about this and it could be okay, because it felt like it was never, ever going to feel like that. And so just that distinction of like, I can't take away the fact that this really sad, terrible thing happened, but I can take away the distress of it. I can take away the disturbance of it. And people really understanding what that means in a lived, felt sense. So it's moments like that that I really love. It's moments like I was just describing where I'm like, cool, let's be creative about this, right? Like, let me give you an experience that probably you don't get from a lot of people because they want you to be the way that, others are versus hearing how you are and what you need. I love the challenge of it. I love being able to joke around with my clients. I think about one, and I had suggested to her to get immune testing, and she did. And, after years and years of failed IUIs and failed IVFs, she was able to create embryos like you wouldn't believe, but they just wouldn't stick. And she just wasn't getting pregnant. And so we did the immune testing. She went with an immune protocol, and she now has a 6-year-old. And I love saying to her, I'm like, is it okay if I take like partial parental ownership of your kid? And she just laughed. She goes, my kid even thinks that about you. Like, we need to thank Dr. Julie because you're here because of her. And it's so funny because like, no, I'm not doing any of the procedures, but it was that suggestion of, can we consider this? And here's why I think we need to consider this. And that's what we needed.
I love that. I'll just ask you a couple more questions, but I find this information so valuable. Are there any great books that you recently read? Anything that you would recommend to the audience?
So this is going to sound like a terrible shameless plug. I'm so sorry about that. I have not been reading many books right now because I have been editing chapters for a book that I just sent to the publisher and is coming out of June this year. It's another book that I think all clinicians should have. And I want to recognize I'm super biased in that opinion. So that's
that was my follow-up question, which was going to be, have you been published? Because I feel like even before the release of this book, You have previously been published.
Yes, yes. I have several chapters that I've contributed to other books. I've got several articles out. This year I was teasing my husband. I'm like, oh my God, this is the year of Julie Bindeman publishing, because I've got this book that's coming out. It is called the Handbook of Abortion Care for Mental Health Professionals. It is your go-to guide if that is not a world you know. And for most of us, it's not a world we know. So it talks about people that are seeking abortion for any reasons, including terminating for medical reasons. Gives different models. It gives different legal and ethical constraints that we need to consider that none of us are thinking about. Like, are you thinking about how HIPAA might impact the clients that you're seeing, and how electronic medical records that are now being shared by different states might impact how you're writing your notes? Not something we tend to think a whole lot about, right? We think, oh, no one's going to get those. It's fine. Are we thinking about what is it that we can say in a session? Are we thinking about, for those of us that might be licensed in multiple states or part of PsyPAC, hey, if I have a client in Texas, what can I say to her? What can I give to her or him, right? What might be different that I can or cannot offer? How do I have to change who I am as a therapist if I'm working, or how I am as a therapist if I'm working with people in other places? So it is amazing, and my team was fabulous, and it's yeah, it's all that in a bag of chips, but I'm a little close to it. I'm a little biased. I recognize that. Um, and yeah, I have a lot of other chapters that are coming. It's been a crazy productive year right now. I don't think we're gonna have another like output year like that for a while, but that's okay, and it's good. But I'm not someone who toots my own horn, so like you, Taina, for saying this. But in terms of, I'm trying, like, at this point in time, I'm just reading fiction because the world is too hard. So I like fiction a lot right now.
Well, in addition to linking all of the including your course, but the chapters and the articles that you've written, I'll also link directly to our Touchstone in the News link, because when your book comes out, it's immediately going there, right? So we want to make sure that people have access to this, and we'll also do it as an announcement, because I think the content in that book is going to be very important for clinicians. Um, um, my joke when I ask people if they've ever worked with the perinatal population, I'll say, "How likely do you think that is to happen if you see people? Like if you see birthing people?" And then I make everybody raise their hand. So it's just this wonderful background knowledge that you're making available to this population, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like I've focused so much on infertility when I've in this conversation, but also if someone's experienced a perinatal loss, that pregnancy is really different. That postpartum is really different. And if we don't know what to look for, we miss things, right? And so it's important to get a sense of like, how do you do a differential diagnosis, like, on what is normative anxiety? Because hey, when you've experienced trauma, it makes sense that you are gearing yourself to re-experience trauma. And I think one of the hardest things in pregnancy, when we're thinking particularly about perinatal loss, is it is the only kind of perinatal loss is the only kind of traumatic experience in which to have a baby, you have to then live 24/7 in your trauma in order to get what it is you want at the end. So, like, think about that, right? If someone's experiencing war and they're being shot at and they're able to get away and they're safe, they can get out of the war zone. And it doesn't mean they won't have PTSD if they hear fireworks or a car back starting or things like that. But they can, that there can be someone to remind them that you are safe here now versus being in the war zone, you are not safe there then. When you're pregnant after a loss, you are not safe here now. because pregnancy is not safe here now. So that's what I'm talking about in this idea of, to have that baby you desire, you have to be so entrenched in potential trauma and PTSD, just as the experience and the time to go through it. And again, that's not something that is an obvious assumption to most of us. And so I think that this kind of blending, this kind of understanding, my course is an overview. And one of the things I love about the Touchstone courses is I've done the NICU course and I've done the pregnancy loss course, and they are such deep dives. And what I love about it is, like, yeah, there's some things about it I knew, but there was a lot of new stuff too. And it kept my attention. And so that's really important to me, is like, I want to be able that even if people, and the best compliments I get are from people that have been doing this work and they say, I'm still learning from you, which is what I want. I want people who have no idea about this work to come take my class. I want people who really know about it to take it as well, because there's always something new and we build a community. I know I sound like an infomercial, but the idea is that it is important to have a wide range knowledge about all of reproductive health. And even if we come to it thinking about pregnancy and postpartum, that the things that might have happened before we meet our clients, or the things that might happen while we're working with them. So another example I think about is a client who had experienced some miscarriages. She got pregnant again. She was towards the end of her pregnancy working with a clinician. Their work was around, how does she, connect to this pregnancy, because she's having a really hard time connecting to the pregnancy because she kept on feeling like something was off. And then she experienced a loss. She went to therapy that next time, and the therapist is like, I don't know what to do with this. This is just, and she got referred to me, and I was glad she did. And as we were working together, like part of it was, I was with this therapist who had no idea what it was I was going through. And she's like trying to make me connect to this baby. And I'm like, you know what? It makes sense that it was hard. It was protective for you to try to not connect. Like, that's what your brain was telling you would be, to try to protect yourself. No, it doesn't mean she wasn't grieving horrifically. Of course she was. But I supported her through a subsequent pregnancy after that as well, and some infertility to get there. And, it was quite a journey, but she was able to have her baby. I think another thing too is, like, we think about, and it's such an American kind of concept, the idea of the happy ending. I grew up on Disney movies. They all had happy endings, thank goodness, because those first 15 minutes of Bambi were really tough. But that happy ending, like, we all want that happy ending. And so what is it like when we're working with clients who might not get the baby at the end? They might not get the rainbow. How do we support them too? What is that like? And what is the toll on us? I mean, that's not something you've really talked about, Taina, but I think it's really important too to think about that this work, as much as we all love it, is so hard. And what's the toll on us, particularly if we're also working on building our families? And what is that then like, to have parallel journeys with our clients? And what do you say or not say? Or how do you tell clients you're pregnant? Do you tell clients you're pregnant? Because if you're on Zoom, do you need to? All of these kinds of things are really important clinical and ethical considerations to make. And they're pretty narrow within the context of this. Because telling a client that maybe you've been working with because she's postpartum, but if you don't really quite understand her infertility or pregnancy journey, telling her you're pregnant And then seeing that she's really lukewarm about it is going to feel really confusing. But if you have an understanding of what an infertility and pregnancy journey can mean to people, yeah, makes a lot more sense.
And I cannot stress enough the need for clinical supervision,
Mhm.
because a lot of the questions that you've just brought up, first of all, they're very important. But secondly, I see them asked in Facebook groups on a very regular basis. And yes, I think that that is a place where people can get ideas of what to do. But we need to go, I think, a step beyond Facebook groups and really start exploring this with clinical supervision and really discussing the ethics and the timing. Um, and in this post-COVID world, yeah, if I can keep my if I can keep myself right here on the screen, maybe I don't have to say it to anyone. But yeah, these are things that we really have to consider and be
Yeah.
mindful about.
Yeah, I say to everyone I work with, and again, I seek it out too. I've been doing this work nearly 20 years and I still seek out consultation all of the time, like on a weekly basis. I am texting one of my friends being like, "Can I run something by you?" Um, I think having the ability to get consultation, whether it is informal consultation, but certainly in the beginning, I would say it should be paid consultation, because you want to make sure that you're not just like struggling with someone else who's at the same place as you are. You want to make sure that you're with someone that really knows this world and the complexities and the intricacies and the interconnectivity of it, in terms of consultation. And it's just such a valuable experience to have, that not just in terms of the EMDR, certainly we're like consultation, consultation, of course, but also just in the content of reproductive health. So part of what I talk about is third party recipient consultations, which makes no sense to those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about. That's okay. I'm happy to tell more later. But when people are like, well, so how do we actually do this? I'm like, okay, so you have a background in terms of how to do it. Seek out consultation so that when you do your first, you're talking to someone before the meeting, and you're talking to someone, they can look at what you write up and how you write it up. They can help you do that, because it's not something we learn in grad school, is it? Like, it's in the same kind of way. It's like bariatric surgery evaluations. Like, we don't learn those in grad school. That is something specific. We need consultation for that. Or gender affirming surgery consultations. Like, we need actual training for that. Like, I can't just go out and be like, yeah, sure, I can do this. I read a book. Fine, I got it. No, I want to get consultation for it.
Ah, Julie, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. I don't think you ever sound like an infomercial. In fact, I think the person who sounds like the infomercial is me, because I say, well, if you've not taken this course with Julie. Um, but I do think that the content is very important, and really made me feel so much more confident, even having the background and experience that I've had in perinatal trauma and in infertility. It's just um, so enriching. I
Thank
feel better for it.
Thank you. I always loved seeing your face. I miss you.
I miss you. Oh, well, in the Mutual Admiration Society. So I am looking forward to your future classes, and it's my understanding that you're going to be doing Fertility 101 with
Yes.
Touchstone later this year. So I'm really looking forward to that, and being able to have people who want that content knowledge to have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you all are going to be seeing this in March. And so please feel free to email me. I do an early bird if you're interested in the course. Now I really sound like I'm selling myself. Um, I do an early bird special where you can save 10%. So it's worthwhile to email me. I'm sure my email will be in the notes for this. But get in touch directly with me. I'm happy to give you the code so that if you're interested in registering. And I do offer a payment plan so that you can do it either in 3 installments or you can do it in 10 installments, because I recognize that it can be really nice to kind of pay as you go, and just to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that feels much more doable. You can pay it in 1 installment too, but you know. So anyway, thank you so much for having me, Taina. Thank you for letting me stand on one of the hills that I die on, which is the fact that all therapists need to understand reproductive health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.